Hey everybody, so before we jump into today's podcast, I just wanted to thank you guys, give you a little bit of a reminder. If you enjoy this content, however you're watching it, consuming it, please like, follow, subscribe, whatever you got to do, comment on it. If you can, leave us a review. It really helps us out and it can help grow our platform and reach more people. And if you know someone that can benefit from this, please share it with them. If you have a question, if you want to reach out to us, let us know. And then lastly, we have all of our amazing programs, courses, and coaching available in the resources below. So check that out. Definitely take advantage of it. We have everything from free options all the way up to paid programs and everything in between to fit pretty much anyone's budget. And it's just a matter of how customized it's going to be based on the price point. So there's really something for everybody. Thank you guys. Let's get on into the episode.
So I'm going to give you guys a cheers really quick. And first off, we have to start by saying congratulations, Colleen and Brian. Cheers. Yeah, Lean. So for those that don't know what we're congratulating you about, Colleen, I'll let you kind of explain what happened this weekend. You had an awesome weekend overall, and then we'll kind of dig into a whole bunch of other stuff. You could explain maybe why you also might sound like you have a list too.
Yes, I'll explain why I have a list. So this weekend I competed at Fuji in the women's heavyweight expert division, which was awesome. Won with submission. So I won my first match with a heel hook and my second match with a mounted guillotine, which was really exciting. And I get to the podium and all my gym friends are there and we're all taking pictures. And Brian's like, "Hey, Ryan," our coach, "can you take one more picture for us?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course." So Brian hops on the podium and he's like, "Hey, you like that hardware?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's my first time doing jiu-jitsu in 2 years. Like, it's awesome." He goes, "How about this?" And he pulls a ring out of his pocket. And I was like, "Oh my gosh." So I got engaged, which was really exciting, doing the thing that I love and how we met. So it was pretty fun. But I have a list because during my match, I tried to snap the woman into a guillotine and she went to stand up, which is absolutely the appropriate response, but she hit the bottom of my chin and I bit my tongue and I started bleeding, just like gushing blood out of my tongue. But now my tongue is swollen, so I sound a little nerdier than usual.
I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't even think you needed to have an explanation. Like, I say you sound great either way, but I figured it's fair enough because people are going to wonder, like, "Hey, what's going on? I know how you talk, Colin. You don't talk like that normally. What are you doing?" Trying to sound fancy here on the podcast, but I don't know. Anyways, that's my but dude, again, congratulations. And also, Kelsey, I got to take a moment to congratulate you with just like life, with the hustle of things that you're working on, putting the work in from business to like personal, like all the things there. So I just want to give you a shout out for that as well.
Thank you.
And then, guys, really quick, before we get into the topic of the day, I already had an introduction here, but I just want to give another plug for both everything that Colleen and Kelsey have going on. Check the description below. We're going to have their social media. We're going to have their websites. If you want to get in contact with them, we're going to have their like business information. So you guys can check out all that awesome stuff and support them to whatever capacity, like, honestly, it resonates the most with you. So I just want to start with that before we get into the fun. And then, ladies, I appreciate you just taking the time because this is the topic that's like I'm really passionate about in a weird way. I think is really important to talk about. And, you know, we've had a multi-part series of like introducing disordered eating, introducing eating disorders, and then I went into my story a little bit. I've had Chuck go into his experience that we haven't even published yet. That one's going to come out later after this. And then I wanted to get just a different perspective, right? So I appreciate you guys coming on to talk about maybe your own perspective on this, your sense as professionals, and then from a personal sense, and then just kind of digging into it. So I'm going to I kind of set the stage there, and I'll just kind of like tag you both in, and then whoever kind of wants to take it from there, we'll just kind of go and dig into the convo.
All right.
Do you want to go first, Colleen? You want me to go?
Sure. Well, a little bit. I think when we talk about eating disordered and disordered eating, it's important to have, your credentials up front so that you know that we're talking from an informed place. I'm an eating disorder survivor. I am also the founder of Embody Carolina, which is a nonprofit organization out of the Center of Excellence for eating disorders at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And the organization is essentially dedicated to supporting the friends of those experiencing eating disorders in getting them to professional help, recognizing the signs and symptoms, and supporting them during the recovery process. I also specialize in body positivity and acceptance in the fitness movement. I am a published author in the Journal of Sports Psychology regarding body image in fitness and ensuring that instructors are taking, and all fitness professionals are taking, a functionally focused approach to fitness. So those are my credentials. I think it's really important that we give a trigger warning when we talk about eating disorders and disordered eating. If this is something that you're experiencing and you find it to be difficult for you, please just understand, I will do my very best to avoid speaking about habits or numbers. But I know that can be really triggering for some folks. So please take care of yourself. And one of the things that I really love about the lifestyle of fitness approach to looking at fitness is that it's more about how you feel in your body and what you want to accomplish in your life. And that's so important because when we talk about eating disorders and disordered eating, we cannot talk about it without talking first about objectification theory. So objectification theory came from a 1997 study. Unfortunately, it was at Duke University, but we will
let it slide.
We'll let it slide. From Fredrickson and Roberts, which was a really important study, and it focused on women. But I think, as Kahlo said, in terms of his experience and that of Chuck, that we can really extrapolate a lot of this to men's experiences as well. But that we feel very much that we are valuable in of how our bodies appear to other people and how other people perceive our bodies. So rather than valuing ourselves for all the amazing things that we're capable of, we depend on a mirror of how other people see us to determine our self-worth. And beyond that, when we talk about eating disorders, we get into psychological things such as maintaining control and all of those things. And so the thing that we really need to focus on in the fitness industry is that functional approach to fitness. No, like fitness is not dependent on a number. It's not dependent on your BMI. It's not dependent on the number on the scale. Like when we look at health measurements, it's more about behaviors than it is about numbers. And so taking a more functionally focused approach to fitness is so important. So that's where I'll start. There's so much that I love getting into on this topic, but really thinking about yourself for the amazing things that you're capable of. And not just from an ableist perspective, right? Like we understand that even folks with different ranges of disabilities, your bodies do amazing things for you. They breathe, they hug, they reach out to your friends, they hold, each other. So there's so many beautiful things that our bodies are capable of, regardless of ability, that we should be embracing.
Dude, I gotta give just a little intro round of applause. Well said.
Okay, so my name's Kelsey. My experience isn't as extensive as Colleen's, but also same with Colleen. I have struggled with eating disorders and disordered eating. It's kind of like a seesaw back and forth. Definitely took a while to kind of fix that or, reframe my mind. I do have a bachelor's of science in applied food nutrition, Grand Valley State, not Duke. And I also have studied holistic nutrition, a little bit of like Ayurvedic medicine too, definitely kind of where my mind goes as far as food. And that was kind of the thing that helped kind of, I guess, heal me and my thoughts about food and my disordered eating, was looking at food instead of like, a punishment or something that like, I don't deserve this because I didn't work hard enough at the gym, as more of like, what is this, like, how is this helping me more than like, how is it hurting me? And that's kind of where the whole holistic side of like eating with intention and looking at food as more of like a tool rather than something that is going to make me feel worse about myself, where it should be feeling better about myself.
Dude, again, I gotta give another round. And I just if you both don't mind, I want to pause for a second because I probably should have even started with this a little bit more detailed. Of I just want to throw out gratitude, because this is another thing that I've even mentioned in prior episodes around this topic, really any topic, especially when we get to this. And like Colleen, to your point, some of the potential triggers and variables at play, and we're all at different stages of the spectrum, right? So like we're all at different points on that spectrum. So I just want to say like how grateful I am for both of you to be here, to be willing to talk about this, to be willing to share not only your experience, but your perspective and the education, because that's, I think, a really important piece from my, view and standpoint, my own personal experience. I can't speak from the other capacities, but being able to at least understand that you're not going through it alone, that there's, sometimes I think there's also a stigma associated with what these things can look like, what it can feel like, and who it's going to affect. And I think sometimes removing that component, like, oh yeah, like especially in the combat sports world. And that's what I really wanted to dig into as well with both of you, as both of you having martial arts experience and backgrounds and dealing with that. But I think this goes across the fitness industry. I made a post, and even someone on that post, I forgot if it was TikTok or Instagram or wherever it was, but they're like, yeah, like even if we go beyond the fight world, just look at the fitness space in general with the marketing side of things and how they're pushing certain things. So anyways, I just want to like work that in there and then get both of your thoughts around, maybe we start more so with the like combative side, the combatives world, or the martial arts world, and then see maybe how that extrapolates into fitness. But I'm open to what both of you think there. Colleen, I'm gonna kick it to you. So I'm gonna like just direct a little bit, and then we'll kind of take it off from there.
I think, well, the issue is I've had this discussion with a number of folks that are in the combat sports world, but the practices that we, myself included, engage in to cut for fights is inherently disordered in a lot of ways. So what we have to ensure, and this, I think, especially for those that are have experiences with eating disorders, is that you're not just focused on the weight cut, you're also focused on your mental health in terms of a weight cut. Because obviously there's a functional reason to do weight cuts in combat sports. I think, when you watch a fight against somebody who doesn't cut versus a fight against somebody who cuts, you see that there's an obvious advantage. And it would be lovely if we could all just agree in the sports world, hey, let's all fight our natural weight. Let's none of us cut, because what it turns out to is people who could be fighting at their natural weight are both cutting to the same weight to fight each other at the same weight. It would be lovely if we could all just, it's the prisoner's dilemma, right? If we could all agree just to fight at our natural weight, it would be lovely. But of course, somebody's going to try to take advantage of the advantage. But when you get into what kind of behaviors you're engaging in combat sports in order to cut weight, it is in many ways inherently disordered. And I, as somebody who had struggled with an eating disorder, when I first decided to get into combat sports, I said, I'm just going to, take the disadvantage and fight at my natural weight, because I think that my mental health is worth preserving, even if it puts me at a disadvantage. And what I was able to find for myself is that I'm very fortunate in that my body's natural weight doesn't go below a certain limit. And I'm also fighting at an amateur level in which, the weight class isn't quite as important. But I was able to meet the weight that my coaches were asking of me without resorting to disordered behaviors. But that's not the same for everybody. So what I think is really important, especially for those that are prone to disordered eating and eating disordered psychological patterns, rather than just the behaviors themselves, is to ensure that they're not monitored only by a nutritionist and a fitness coach when they undergo a weight cut, but also be in touch with a mental health professional the whole time. Because one pro fight is not worth you slipping into a disordered eating and experiencing what is the most deadly psychological disorder. I think that when we talk about eating disorders, we sometimes forget how deadly they are, right? It's not worth winning one pro fight to potentially fall into organ failure. So it's a tricky thing.
Yeah, so Kelsey, I'm going to kick it immediately to you, and then I'll maybe dabble in there as well.
But yeah, I can't follow her. She's just like on point there. Obviously, her experience with combat and cutting is a little bit more than mine. A lot of my issues kind of with disordered eating stem from other athletics, which is weird that I would then turn to like combat sports because that is kind of a more of like a weight cut thing. But at the same time, I think that it also provides a lot of like really positive things mentally too. But she is right when you look at that and you kind of see people thinking they need to cut an X amount of weight, whereas what if instead of trying to like cut to get to this weight class, maybe you just need to gain, and instead of thinking I have to gain weight, the weight you're gaining is muscle, because that weighs more than fat anyway. And to me, it makes more sense because going into a fight, you want to have more of that like lean strength to kind of go against your opponent. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just kind of look at it that way as, someone, if you've ever cut before, or if you've ever experienced like any type of eating disorder, or even if you've like had a day where you are an active athlete and maybe that day you just haven't like eaten enough and you go to the gym and you feel tired and sluggish, like that's just going to carry over into your performance where you're feeling not your best. Like food is where we get our energy. So being able to have like a healthy, balanced diet where you're feeling your greatest, like that's going to be the best performance instead of feeling sluggish because you need to be at a certain weight class. That's not your natural, weight.
Yeah, I think so. I want to like reframe something or just reflect on something that I'm hearing from both of you guys. I want to make sure I'm hearing you properly. Also, I'm practicing my skills from that health coaching side. So for those of you guys that didn't see, I'm going to randomly plug this in now. I'm just really excited I passed my exam, so I'm throwing out that reframing and reflecting skills. I'm hearing like two topics come up that I think are really, really important to unpack is the psychological component of things combined with the physiological and performance-based side of things as well. And there's like so many branches that go off of both of those categories. From, to your point, Colleen, when we think about like, okay, well, I have to go see a nutritionist, not only a nutritionist, but preferably maybe a specialist in this niche, in this category that has experience with that, combined with, all right, I have my fitness coach or health or whatever, but also the mental side of it, the psychological side of it, that is a very important piece to unpack, because then it's not only from, again, my shallow understanding of these things and like from digging into it from personal experience. Typically, I'm going to speculate for a lot of us out there, it's not just about, it started because like from this catalyst from sports to just like one behavior. It's because there's also some deep-rooted psychological things that are also feeding that behavior and feeding those things that go into it. And then that can be combined with the performance side, like you said, kind of, Kelsey, with the idea of like, well, and then even this ties in with what you said as well, Colleen, like you're jeopardizing your health, you're jeopardizing your performance. Like literally malnutrition will kill you, as well as organ failure will kill you. And then not even when it comes to the detrimental cost of like mortality, but in the long-term potential tax that you pay with your endocrine system, with your adrenal glands, like with all these other impacts that it can have over time that we may not even notice at one shot, but it accumulates. And those are things that we have to kind of then subsequently just like play with. But again, I'm gonna get into this whole, like get into the weeds here a little bit. So I want to kind of just pause for a second to make sure, like, is that fair to grasp from both of what you said? Do you feel like that's like a fair summary or like even a reflection on like, hey, from the psychological to the physiological and performance side as well?
100%. And just adding a little bit onto that, I'm not sure what the ratio is in terms of how folks die from eating disorders, but it's not just organ failure, right? It's also suicide, right? Because the psychological power is so, sorry, my dogs are playing with very hard toys.
Yes, cool.
Is that it's not purely physical in terms of how that happens. A lot of it is mental. And so it's just not worth risking your health. And so this wasn't necessarily from the eating disorder perspective, but rather from the psychological perspective. My psychiatrist actually said to me, after your last fight, I need you to take a break. You need to reset mentally. And that wasn't because of eating disorders. That was because of anxiety and depression. But it's one of those things where that stress can really contribute to a lot of negative physical, emotional, social behaviors. So it's a very stressful environment, and those can trigger disordered eating and eating disorders more so than even just the weight cut itself.
Yeah, with kind of what Colleen said, I was obviously diagnosed with orthorexia, which is disordered eating. And with that, it kind of like comes full circle because you kind of get everything with it. That includes your depression, your anxiety, OCD tendencies. And what that basically is, it was like an obsession with eating healthy. So even though I was like kind of like coming out of this like eating disorder, kind of being put on certain medications that were making me gain weight, I then was like, well, I need to be eating healthy though. And it almost became this unhealthy obsession with counting calories and, making sure I was doing this and like, yeah, just kind of that looking at food in a bad way. So yeah, it is a mental disorder, definitely. And yeah, it can pack everything else together like that.
Kelsey, if I could tag on to what you're saying, I think it's really important, and I want to make sure that you're comfortable with what I'm saying. When we talk specifically about orthorexia, which according to the DSM-5 falls into what's called OSFED, otherwise specified feeding and eating disorders, that you don't need to meet the clinical criteria for anorexia nervosa bulimia or binge eating disorder to be considered as having an eating disorders. So I think that people say, oh, well, I'm not anorexic, so I'm okay. Or I'm not bulimic, so I'm okay. Or I don't experience binge eating disorder, so I'm okay. That's also why we have eating disorders versus disordered eating. And all of them are worthy of attention. So simply because you don't meet the clinical criteria for one of the quote unquote big three doesn't mean that you don't deserve attention and help and support. So like Kelsey, I was classified under OSFED as well, which was then at the time called EDNOS. But it has been one of the things that I remind people of because I think, again, I don't know the exact breakdown of who experiences it, but it's a huge percentage of people that have OSFED rather than anorexia, bulimia, or binge eating disorder. OSFED is a huge percentage of the people that are diagnosed with eating disorders or disordered eating. So please understand that you deserve help and attention regardless of which of those things you fall into, especially when we talk about men experiencing eating disorders. OSFED is going to account for a lot of those cases because we look at things like steroid abuse, which doesn't necessarily meet the criteria for binge eating disorder, anorexia, or bulimia.
Yeah, and like kind of to piggyback on that as well, if you're okay with that for both of you guys here, is to unpack that idea. I think that's I appreciate you brought that up, Colleen. So that's, I think, such an important, strong point. I want to just kind of reiterate again and double down on is this idea of, we don't have to have these hard identified boxes. Oh, well, if I'm not in box A or box B or box C, looking at specific, like, oh, this exact diagnosis, then it's okay. Or that, like you said, it's still valid to be able to have help and to break down again. And this might be from my own personal experience, just from my own like youth and going through, I've been in therapy basically since I was like 7, to be very transparent with everyone in the audience too. And I've talked about this in a variety of ways. And from a young age, I always thought there was like a stigma, and it might be just self-inflicted or self-placed of like, oh, well, if you're going to therapy, there's something quote unquote wrong with you, you're crazy, or like this kind of category we chunk it in where it's like, I honestly, I think if we unpack that, like everyone, honestly, like if we go to get a physical every year from that standpoint, there's that kind of upkeep. Same thing on the mental health side. Yeah, I think this kind of tags in the piggyback on what both of you were saying here is that idea of like, even if it's not a diagnosed particular situation or diagnosis yet, or even not yet, but it hasn't had that diagnosis, doesn't mean that it's not valid. It's not something that we can learn from. And that's why, like, I tried to even put out with content, and I'm like realizing now, even in hindsight, the way you kind of worded, Colleen, I should have hit you up sooner, honestly. So that's my bad, y'all. Because some of the stuff I put out here, like, I'm even saying, like, hey, like, so we have these diagnoses that fall in this eating disorder category, but there's still disordered eating and this kind of like bridge between this intermesh. And just because there's not a diagnosis doesn't mean there's not something else going on. It's something to be aware of. But I think also, I'm curious how you guys feel about this too. I think also there's maybe a potential fear of judgment, not even externally like put out, but even internally. Then once you acknowledge, like, oh, whether there's an identifier, diagnosis, or like, hey, you have to look in the mirror in a way that you never had to before, that becomes very, very risky potentially to initially do that. And that takes a lot of courage from my perspective. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well on like, maybe there could be a fear to speak to maybe the people in the audience that they don't want to talk about it yet because there's a fear associated with it, or there's that stigma maybe, or some block potentially. And again, like while staying within all of our scopes of practice here as well. But anyways, I'm just gonna throw that out there. What do you guys think?
100%. It's really difficult because I think anybody who is diagnosed or is experiencing a mental health concern, there is a huge stigma associated with all of them. I have a number of diagnoses. Like Kahlo, I've been in therapy for a long time, which actually started with an eating disorder. And we noticed that the eating disorder was actually a symptom of another mental disorder, bipolar disorder. So they can interact and work together and, team up like the assholes they are. But it's one of the things for me, being outspoken helps me combat the stigma for myself. And I hope it helps combat the stigma for other people. So I think one of the helpful things to do is to find a group of people that are experiencing similar things, and be able to talk openly about it in a safe space. Individual therapy is amazing. For eating disorder specifically, I think group therapy can be really powerful. But it's really important to understand that you are inherently and innately worthy simply for being you, regardless of any kind of diagnoses or lack thereof. And again, talking from the clinical perspective, it is very, very, very strict, the clinical diagnoses for a lot of these eating disorders. And a lot of people say, oh, well, my, psychiatrist didn't diagnose me with X or Y, therefore it's okay and I can keep doing what I'm doing. No, in the DSM-4, amenorrhea was required as a clinical diagnostic criteria for anorexia. And that meant that no male, right? If you take it literally, no male could be diagnosed with anorexia because they didn't have a loss of period, right? And I'm sure the clinicians took that into account when they did it, but the criteria is extremely strict. And the DSM-5 changing the criteria was meant to be a little bit more encapsulating of different experiences, but it's still a pretty strict criteria. So it's important to understand that whether you have a diagnosis or not, the whole point of having eating disorders versus disordered eating is to understand that the behaviors and the thoughts themselves are problematic regardless of a diagnosis, and that you don't have to have a diagnosis to have valid and legitimate concerns. If you have a diagnosis, don't let it define you. It is a part of who you are. It is not the totality of who you are.
Yeah,
Careful, yeah.
kind of with any, like you said, any mental health issue, because it is one, seeking help for it is really hard. It took me at least a year and a half till I think I hit my breaking point, or I told someone I need help. And then even from the first time I went to therapy, it's probably, I'm going to say it's been it probably took me 2 years to really make changes. And then it's been at least another 4 years to actually feel like I'm progressively in front of it. So when I start to feel those feelings, any type of mental health feeling, I already know what I can be doing to kind of combat that kind of sense. If I'm in an environment where I can feel the idea of disordered eating, or being obsessed with what I'm eating, or getting the anxiety from food, if I feel like I'm in that environment, then I really kind of have to take myself out of that environment, whether it's just temporarily or permanently. And being around, who are you surrounding yourself with? Are they keeping those positive thoughts? Or are they someone who's just feeding into what you have? And I think that's the biggest thing, is kind of watching and reflecting on how I've grown from that first day of therapy till now, and just kind of seeing what's changed, not just physically and mentally, but also who's around me and what environments am I choosing to stay in, kind of thing. So I think that's also very important too, not just trying to keep yourself and kind of look at yourself like it's going to be a simple kind of switch, if that makes sense.
Kelsey, you're just volleying stuff that I want to talk about.
So I'm trying to go back and
I think what Kelsey was saying about the kind of social situations you put yourself in is really important, because we get into what's called fat talk and muscle talk. And this, again, isn't necessarily specific to eating disorders, this is something that, according to, I think the study was done by Kellogg, so like we can talk about how scientifically accurate it is, but 93% of women engage in fat talk.
Yeah.
93%. Oh, no, that's not even true. Wait, stop. The Kellogg study was that like 94%. I'm making that percentage up. I don't have that percentage in front of me right now, of women have an I hate my body moment each day. This statistic, the one that 93% of women engage in fat talk, actually comes from a scientific study done at the Body and Media Lab at Northwestern University. So this one's actually legit. 93% of women engage in fat talk every day. And again, this is a study done with cisgender women. We're not talking about trans women. We're not talking about non-binary people. We're not talking about a whole host of people, including men, that also have a propensity for eating disorders. And for some of these populations, a higher propensity for eating disorders. I need to slow down my talk. I get so excited. And 60% of women believe that fat talk is helpful, which is nuts so pants, because we know that actually engaging in fat talk and muscle talk makes us feel bad about ourselves, psychologically speaking. So the studies show that when we talk about ourselves in a negative way and we talk about the bodies of others in a negative way, we actually feel negatively psychologically about ourselves. And that's been proven over and over and over. It also comes into place when we talk about fitspiration, when we're looking at images that are meant to make us feel bad about ourselves. They do, they're successful. But one of the things that I really love, another study that Renee Engel did out of the Body and Media Lab at Northwestern University, is that when you shut down fat talk in a conversation, so let's say Kahlo and I are saying things like, oh, I'm so fat, like I'm such a lard, like I shouldn't have eaten whatever the other day. It makes all three of us feel worse, psychologically speaking. So all of us feel negative psychological impacts as a result of this conversation. If Kelsey interrupts us and says, you guys, I don't think this is a helpful conversation. There's so many more things that I care about you rather than what you ate last Tuesday. Really, that does not matter to me. I think that you are strong and confident and amazing and whatever it may be. Shutting down that conversation mitigates the psychological effects for all three of us in the conversation. So who you surround yourself with really does affect your psychology in a very, very powerful way. So Kelsey is speaking the science. She may not have had the study in front of her, but that is some science right there.
Hashtag science. And just to piggyback on both of your points, like, honestly, I don't even need to be here. I'll be honest. I'm just kind of like sitting back and like taking little notes. But it's like stimulating maybe questions or thoughts. And one, like, I kind of like to pull out key words that are jumping out at me. So I want to just like throw that to both of you. Quality of life is something that we didn't specifically say that word for word, but like quality of life is to me a reoccurring theme that I'm kind of hearing here. And to surmise what both of you are saying, but I also wanted to put it out there to maybe dig a little bit more into maybe the variables at play here, like with when we think about quality of life. And maybe like on the flip side, like, is that to your point, Colleen, and to your point, Kelsey, with like the social dynamics, the community and the support system, where does that fit? And being able to boil it down to a question is like, to me, the question I always boil down almost any decision in my life to is like, is this a net positive or a net negative on my quality of life? That's like a very oversimplified way to do things, but I just want to throw that out there. And then I want to kick it to both of you just to kind of get your thoughts or maybe where that leads us to next.
I mean, I kind of look at it. What was that Netflix show that was like when a lady was like organizing people's houses? Like, does this bring you joy?
Yeah.
Not get rid of it. It's kind of like the same thought that, I mean, you can have like, is this bringing you joy? So this is actually really perfect because I kind of wrote like some stuff down, and there's always one quote and that I've always thought about and I've never really understood it. And it kind of goes with what we're talking about, like the psychological, the fat talk. And it is by a famous model. You've probably heard of it. It's the whole nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. And I hate that quote because I don't know how the two are comparable. Because one is like an image and the other is like a physical thing. And I just never really understood it. And I always look at it like that's such a disordered way of thinking about how you look and how you eat, because I, for one, think it's super untrue. I also think that you can be fit and healthy and eat what you want in a decent moderation, as we've like talked about before. And it's one of those things that, you know, people, specifically women, because they look at that as kind of a role model or someone that they want to look like, and kind of have that thought of like, you know, they see someone famous, beautiful, fit, thin, looking like saying things like that, and then it just kind of spirals into that whole negative thoughts and fat talks and everything. And it's just, I definitely want to bring it up because it's one of those things that I'm like, that's such a terrible quote.
It's
and I
the worst.
agree with it. And I can say, looking at the people here who were all fit, healthy people, like, I definitely know that we eat things that taste way better than skinny. Whatever that means, because I don't know how you can compare it, but okay.
I think based on one of the things that we have to talk about when we go back to what Kelsey's saying is there's a huge stigma around body shape and size. There are Olympic athletes who are considered morbidly obese, right? Like, and like we can talk about, well, there's an obesity epidemic. Yes, of course. There, like, and one of the things that has been difficult for me as coming from the experience of somebody in eating disorder advocacy of, you know, we can acquire health at any size is having that conversation with people in the fitness industry who firmly believe that obesity is the worst thing that can happen to a person. It's not. The health effects of lack of behavior is what we're talking about. There was a scientific study that was conducted that showed that regardless of weight, engaging in 5 key behaviors is what reduced the likelihood of mortality. And I think that when we separate the conversation from weight and put it into behaviors, like Kelsey said, everything in moderation. 2 of the behaviors were tobacco cessation and alcohol limits, right? So when we talk about behaviors, rather than talking about weight, we have a much more productive conversation. And that comes into the shaming of people at different body shapes and sizes. And what's interesting about that is when we look at the science, when we look at the science, what we see is that shaming people for their appearance doesn't make them work out more. One of the studies done by Melby in 2005 suggested that people who are low in self-objectification participate in exercise at about a 56% rate, whereas people who are high in self-objectification work out at a rate of about 39%. So if you have high self-objectification, if you believe that your worth is dependent on what you look like, you're actually less likely to engage in exercise. According to another study that was completed by Sigar Spruitt-Metz and Nolan Hoxema in 2006, participants with body shape motives were significantly less physically active than those with non-body shape motives. So if somebody is working out for the purpose of looking better, they're actually less likely to engage in exercise. And then, my friends, another study that was done in 2011 suggested that health-related reasons for exercise were negatively associated with body image concerns. So if somebody is working out for the purpose of feeling good and strong and capable in their bodies rather than for how they look like, they're actually less likely to have body image concerns, which again contribute to a lower participation in exercise. But if you didn't believe me from those 3 studies, there's another study that was conducted by, I can't pronounce this name either, Mahaffey and Teigman in 2003 that said that functional reasons for exercise such as health, enjoyment of fitness have been associated with an increased self-esteem and body esteem as well as lower levels of body dissatisfaction. So when you shame people, all this goes to say that one of the main arguments I get when I say it's not about body shape or size, it's about behaviors, is people say, well, you body shame people so that they engage in healthier behaviors. That does not work. When you tell people that they look a certain way and that therefore they should do X, Y, or Z, that backfires. They're less likely to participate in exercise. If you say, hey, I think you should go to this class with me, it's super fun and it makes you feel better, people are more likely to do it. They're more likely to do it. And so it's like, it's one of these things where like body shaming not only misses the mark, it is completely contrary to the point.
That was really good.
So again, I want to reiterate, by the way, guys, like I'm going to take the references, and we're going to have them below. If you guys want to dig into that a little bit more, I don't know who wants to. Like, I know that sounds weird. Like, I personally like looking at that stuff. I feel like there's a few people in the audience that may like it because they'll like randomly message me or on the side. So, but for everyone else, like, don't worry, you don't have to like dig into all that. But I think those are amazingly important points that I just kind of like, again, the thing I'm curious to pull out here is like, after we got psychology, we've got the physiology, we've got performance, we have quality of life, looking at kind of the why behind the what, and then the components of like those external factors and the community sense of things kicking into it. It's, again, like going back to like, even like if we base it on BMI, this is also like, I have my own beef with BMI for a different reason. And maybe I'm subjective because like, if you look at BMI, to your point, by the way, Colin, I'm considered overweight based on my BMI alone. Now, if you look at my body fat percentage, you look at my body composition, look at all my blood work markers, my resting heart rate, all those other things, like I'd be considered a very fit, healthy person, so to speak. So going back to even the impact of obesity or overweight on a BMI scale, and then the impact, and then the look at the behavior patterns of the difference of the two, is that I think is such a beautiful point to bring up. And I'm really happy like that you did, because I'm going to dig into that. Even on others, I'm going to totally use that, by the way. So I appreciate that. But anyways, I'm ranting here a little bit. And Kelsey, I feel like you wanted to tag in and say something, but I'm going to come back to that too. But Kelsey, I want you to like dig into what you got. I see it.
I don't have like the article I was reading or whatever, but it definitely was something that stuck out to me like more than anything. And it kind of piggybacks off what we're talking about in the whole psychology. And it was kind of like talking about your quote unquote, like fat or unhealthy looking friend is probably a lot healthier than most other people who are skinny. And you know, that really made me think. And the article was about a girl who she's, you know, plus size, she's a long distance like backpacker, you know, and she receives like a lot of hate. Like, how can you do that when you're overweight? And she's like everyone else does. Maybe it takes me a little longer, it still does it. But she kind of shared the whole story is kind of like going to the doctor and basically the doctor not really giving her the time of day, just basically be like, you're overweight, here's things you need to do. But she's like, she doesn't know that I hike X amount, that I'm like, I eat this or whatever. And that actually like all my blood work came back that of a quote unquote healthy person. And that kind of makes me think, it kind of goes back to that, like this whole, like your skinny friend or whatever might not be as healthy as someone who is, you know, who doesn't look healthy, but they actually are. And I think that kind of goes back into it. Like, as long as what you're doing and you feel good, it doesn't really matter like what you look like. If you are getting out there and you are, you know, exercising or doing things just for the enjoyment of it because you like it, it really doesn't matter like kind of what you look like and how your body reflects that. Because it's kind of how I look at it. And I just thought it was a really like interesting article. I also like long distance backpacks. It was one of those things where I was like really into it, and like I was super impressed with it.
Yeah, and even just to maybe like dig into that component, or like what we're kind of talking about here a little bit more, of that idea of like when we look at the behavior patterns comparatively just to like numbers, the idea that you can gain more insight from the numbers, I think is like, that's a great example of how that can be falsified and just lead into correlation, not causation. And what I mean by that is we think about these two things. Like, I also go back to this study that I referenced. I think it was 2014, 2015. It was like, I ultimately looked at a meta-analysis with one of our clinical nutritionists on like the kind of breakdown of red meat, the impact versus cancer and all these other things. Different topic for a different day. But the point is how they categorize things and clump things together. So for example, we're saying, all right, we're going to take everybody that's considered obese based on BMI. Now, we're not looking at, do they smoke? Do they drink? Are they obese because they have, you know, X amount of muscle on their frame and they're active? Like, to me, I think of it's the process versus the outcome. Like, what's their process day to day look like? Like you said, Colleen, the behavior patterns, like you're pointing out, Kelsey, with like how they spend their life, like what's their resting heart rate, those things, and how they spend what they can control. Because guess what? No matter how disciplined we are, because I think it comes like, oh, you have discipline on this. Like, I don't care how disciplined you are. No one has the power to say, hey, body, lose weight right now. No one. No one has that ability. I don't care how good you are, how whatever. You can't say, all right, body, we're going to lose X pounds of fat today. No one has that ability. You can try and control all these other choices. And even then, all these other systems and variables kick in that you have no control over. So even to that point from the psychology, accepting those things, like that's a whole nother category. And I can rant and go on and on. But we're probably gonna have to break this up into a whole nother part and dig into a whole much more, because there's so much more we haven't even scratched the surface on, because we're kind of getting towards the end here. But I wanted to just say that to just kind of kick it to both of you to bring it home with maybe closing thoughts or ideas that you wanted to maybe either surmise or throw in that we didn't get to yet, or any kind of like maybe takeaways. Because I always like to go back to like, all right, what's actionable steps? What are takeaways? What are things we can highlight from this? So curious to hear both of your thoughts around that too. Colleen, I'm going to kick it to you.
Okay. So this is also where we get into the conversation about separating, because so we've had a lot of conversations separating a number of different things. We've separated health from size. We separated behaviors from size. We separated all these things. We also have to separate size and health from self-worth, right? Right. Yeah. So we have this, like the three of us love health and fitness. That is something that's important to the three of us. That's not a priority for some people. And that's okay, right? Like we have to, like, I think a lot of times we have this conversation socially where we say, it's my body, it's my choice, as long as I'm not affecting anybody else, that's my choice. And I think as much as we would love for everybody to be healthy for a number of reasons, not just physical health, but mental health. And we know that, basic nutrition and fitness habits come into play for both mental and physical well-being. That's, again, not a priority for some people. Or, they don't have the opportunity to work out because they're working 3 jobs to take care of 3 kids and they're a single parent, whatever. For a number of reasons, there's a lot of people that aren't going to have the opportunity or don't care to engage in these healthy behaviors. And while that may not be the best thing medically or mentally or emotionally, it's their priority and it doesn't make them any less worthy as a human being. And I think that's another hard conversation to have, again, with people that care so much about health and fitness. Like I care about health and fitness a lot, and I want that for other people too, but it has to be their priority. I've met a lot of people that say, you know what, I don't want to exercise. It's not going to be a part of my life. I want to eat what I want. That's a part of my life. I want you to recognize me and respect me as a human being. Absolutely. There's no moral value in working out or eating right in quotations, right? And as frustrating as that is for a lot of people, it's true. People are inherently and innately worthy simply for being, not for doing. So that's my little rant.
Wait, Colleen, before we take it to Kelsey, can I just tag it on some like this? I don't want to we could unpack a whole thing just on this guy. Everything we touch on, we could unpack a whole episode just on that. So I think that's a very powerful and important point, is the judgment. Going back to the community side of things, I wonder though, and this is I think a completely different episode or topic, because I'm also I'm very transparent. I'm kind of like just triggered in that thing, because you said I care, right? Like, as a health person, as someone that's in that, I'm immediately hesitant to even want to entertain that conversation, but it's a very valid and important conversation. So I'm also just transparently trying to recognize hey, I get it. You guys might have resistance to that or anything. It's okay. But the one thing I'm curious about, where your thoughts might lie with, if we were to take, I'm going to make a weird analogy here. It's when it goes back to a parent or a kid. Now I think of it as a parent. Now, if I'm, let's say, making certain choices that's influencing my child, where does it become the moral or ethical variable of when now I have to protect my kid? Because I 100% agree. If you're not affecting anyone else, do whatever you want, and you're still valued, and you're that's still important. And even if it's potentially, even if you're coming at a cost to society, there's still an innate value to an individual. We're still individuals, we're still people, there's still value to be had. But I wonder, this is I'm getting into a slippery slope here. I don't know. I don't know if you're kind of getting where I'm going. But I'm just curious, without digging too hard into that.
No, this is a super important point, and this is where you get into, does it affect somebody else? Let's talk about secondhand smoke real quick. There's no moral value in smoking or not smoking. You're not a bad person because you smoke. But if your kids are inhaling toxins from the cigarette, that's a problem. On the flip side, a kid is no less valuable for being fat, right? So it's one thing where, again, we get into this thing of it doesn't affect your self-worth. Is the kid being negatively affected in terms of health impact? So just because a kid is quote unquote fat or quote unquote obese doesn't mean that the kid in of themselves have less moral value. If the child is not healthy because of behaviors that have been imposed on them by an adult, that's when we have the moral ethical conversation. But the child themselves are no less valuable for engaging in behaviors that were inflicted upon them, and they are not valuable determined on their size. So it's a very nuanced conversation.
Well said, though. I appreciate all those points. And again, I want to reiterate, this is like a very maybe general statement too. Like going back to that, especially for anyone that might be younger listening to this, or anyone at any stage, like it's not necessarily your fault, but it's still your responsibility to have to potentially address, cope, or deal or take action at a later stage. So again, it's not your fault, no matter whatever that, like into whatever capacity, whether it's like environmental based behavior patterns, like you said, or trauma, or relationship, or like even like neurological components and potential chemical balancing things that are going on there, like whatever it is, not your fault, but it's like our responsibility at the end of the day. Anyway, I'm sorry, Mike. Now I'm ranting again. I don't want to ramble too hard. I thought that was a beautiful point. I appreciate you like kind of like entertaining the thought there and then providing a well-placed and worded kind of supported statement. So I appreciate that.
And I appreciate you being like, no, that triggers the hell out of me, because that's a conversation we have to have. Health and fitness people want everybody else to be healthy and fit. And like,
and I'm working on it too, honestly.
And what we
like
have
I'm working
to do,
on that.
We have to invite people into this space rather than force it upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have to do also is, for example, I think runners want everybody to run. And martial arts people want everybody to do martial arts. And Zumba people, they want everybody to Zumba, right? But what we have to do is say, find a form of fitness that you love. My mom, her form of fitness was walking her dog. That's what she loved doing. She walked her dog, and that was her fitness, partially because she had a severe physical disability where walking her dog was about all she could do. But she loved it. That was her mental respite. That was her physical respite, right? That was a hugely important thing for her. So we have to stop projecting what we want onto other people, but rather invite them into a space where they find the thing that fulfills them.
Kelsey, you got to follow that. You got this, homie.
Really, I'm gonna sign off with, obviously, like we kind of talked a lot about some heavy issues. If anyone has ever felt any type of like disordered eating, or thought maybe they had a eating disorder, or even any mental health issue, like I said, the first step is kind of admitting it to yourself, and then finding someone that you can talk to, even if it's not a mental health professional, even if it's a friend. I'm, like I said, when I finally like hit my bottom, the first person I talked to was my older sister, who at the time was in nursing school. So she's not a professional yet. So having someone that can kind of help you figure out that next step. And I think if you are feeling that way, definitely trying to find someone that you can go to, whether it is just a friend, family, or an actual professional right away. And knowing that there is a way to overcome those things. Like I said, there's no cure for mental health. Like I've heard people say that they've been cured of depression. Like that's not how it works. But there is definitely like a time that it will take for you to overcome that. And I think the first step, is finding someone that you can go to. And like Colleen said, it is not who you are. I think I sent it to you, Colleen, as a quote. It's like, when it's raining, you feel the rain, you see the rain, but you're not the rain. When you have any type of mental health disorder, you are not that. It does not determine who you are. it's something that you feel that you can definitely work.
I just want to say, you got to reiterate this. I appreciate it.
That's on a Monday morning. So
I'm going to say excited for lack of a better term. Not that I'm excited about the topic per se, or like, but about what you guys have brought to the table, and like just for sharing and the insight, and like honestly, like just for my own takeaways, selfishly, like my own insight gained here, and then the trying to share that with others, and being able to double down on that in a variety of ways. So to bring it home, I just wanted to again say a few things. Thank you guys. Obviously, or A1 or 1A, we'll break that down to a little subcategory. Colleen, Kelsey, thank you for taking the time out of your day, out of your week to just kind of speak to this and share this. I guess the B to that is for those of you that are watching, listening, however you're consuming this information, if this resonated with you to any capacity, or you want to see more or hear more and support Kelsey or Colleen, or have support from them, or whatever that looks like, we'll have their information on social media as well as their business information below. They have awesome projects and things going on, as well as the resources and references that we had. I'll put those below in the description. And again, like all the other fun stuff. But I just wanted to say I appreciate you guys, and thank you guys also for everyone watching and listening. Thank you for doing this, and to kind of just echo what Colleen and Kelsey were saying. Like, you are valid, you are important, and this is just one aspect of like an entire life, right? So that's gonna do it, y'all. I appreciate you guys. I'm gonna high five and cheers everyone to the phone. You know I got to high five and cheers. So later, y'all.
So I just wanted to say thank you guys again for watching, listening, consuming that episode. If you guys enjoyed it and you haven't already, please please comment. If you haven't reviewed, please leave a review. If you haven't followed or subscribed, please do that as well. Again, it tremendously helps us out. And then just a quick reminder, if you guys want more resources, we have them below. We have our programs, everything from free all the way up to paid, and kind of everything in between. Dial in with the customization, and we have more information on different programs and resources in our newsletter. So if you haven't signed up for that, do so below. It's free. And that is it, y'all. See you on the next one.